You are listening to The Platform, a podcast to learn about our digital world. I am Mike Veldhuis, partner at Auth0.com.
Hello, I'm Jas Sagoo, and I'm Head of Solution Engineering and Professional Services at Auth0 International.
Welcome in the second episode number 10, that I'm talking with Jas of Auth0. Welcome, Jas.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. And we had a lot of fun recording the first episode, where we really set the stage for this new theme about the great balancing act of security. And we talked about our front doors, that we have to lock them with a lot of keys, but still keep it convenient. I think it was really insightful, and we kicked it off. And today we're going to talk about buy versus build strategies. So actually it's about implementing a solution, whether you buy it from a vendor or you build it yourself, right?
Absolutely. And look, there's no right or wrong answer, but there are pros and cons of each approach.
And it's kind of exciting to talk with you about this topic, because you're clearly in the league and in the team because you're working for Auth0. But you are in the industry for a very long time as well, and we've seen a continuing process of the solutions that pop up that really enable you to buy a stack of solutions to build even bigger and better platforms. Right? True.
Look, it's a big, I would say, it's a decision that you have to make, and the decision needs to be backed up by, the approach that you want to take. It depends on what you're trying to establish, and also it also depends on, I'll say, is the extent of the project and program that you're trying to create. If it's a single application or one-off, then maybe you can get away with building. But if you're going to go and integrate multiple applications across multiple geographies and so on, then my approach would be that you probably want to consider buy. But look, we'll get into the detail through this session.
Yeah, and what is the purpose of this session is not that we want to people after they listen to this 15 minutes podcast. Okay, I'm so stupid, I built the stuff myself. Buy is the only way. Like you said, it's a choice. But it's a very interesting topic, because it's something we had to learn at Nalta as well. When we started 20 years ago, even 21 years ago, it was like, we're software developers, right? We build the stuff that our customers are asking us to do. And you really have to learn and get in the mindset that for a lot of solutions, it's better to buy it. For example, we are a Boomi partner. We're working a lot with Boomi. We talked a lot about Boomi in the podcast series. And that's clearly a buy strategy. We don't want to develop every interface ourselves. Sometimes it's the best thing to do, but in a lot of cases, we just don't want to buy or just don't want to build for instance, Salesforce adapter or connectivity to Salesforce. We want to buy it. And that's what we want to talk about today. And actually, the story of Nalta with Auth0 is kind of cool, because it were the developers that came to me, said, Mike, we are starting to look into the Auth0 portfolio, and we really want to learn more. We implemented it on several occasions, and wouldn't it be smart to have a partnership with Auth0 like we have with Boomi? And that's where it kicked off for us, So we want to be specialized on Auth0. But today we want to discuss those both areas. The when do you buy, when do you build? Is that a clear cut?
It's not that clear cut. And what I would say is, what we have to look at is, I think it's important to understand the advantages of both approaches. We need to understand the disadvantages of both approaches. And also, when we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches, we have to talk about also, the investment required for, either approach, build or buy. And not only the investment to do the first project. What happens when you do the second project, the third project? What about how do you determine the scope of what you're trying to do? Is it better to build that scope yourself, or is it better to buy that scope yourself? When you're buying, are you at the mercy of the vendors and the functionality they provide? So there's a lot to take in and consider. So let's take it away. Let's try and understand some of those considerations.
Could we start like really at the start of the journey for a customer? They decide to build an application. Maybe you have a good example of a customer you've been working on that needs an identity management system, that really needs a module in their stack to make a safe environment, to have this safe front door.
Yeah. So yes. So imagine there's a requirement to have an identities, a login box. Let's say, put it simply, into your application. What one has to consider is in some of the instances is time. How quickly do they want it there? Is it easier? Is it easier to go and build something yourself, or using maybe some open source technologies? Or start from scratch, or is it easier to go and buy something? Again, then you need access to budget. But normally, what one has to consider when they're thinking around build versus buy is, if you're going to go and build something from scratch, what could end up, what you have to consider is, first of all, you have to have the skills in-house to go and build that. And Mike, I've not even talked about whether we've gathered all the right requirements yet, right? Because that's a whole different topic. If you ask everybody in the whole organization, they'll, by the time that you finish, you'll have a list of 100 requirements.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
And you can have scope creep at that point, right? So let's focus on if you're going to build it. If you're going to build it, fine. You've got the development team, you've got the engineers who are going to build it. I think the question I would ask is, are they experts in security, experts in identity? Okay, that's one thing to consider. Assuming they are, you go and build a solution. Very quickly, you get to a point where you need to start understanding how you're going to deploy that solution. Is it going to be on-premise? Are you going to procure hardware, or is it going to be virtualized? Are you going to then deploy the solution you built on the cloud? How are you going to scale it as your users increase? Actually, who's going to maintain that? How do you build resiliency into that solution? Now, I've talked about some of the challenges that come up, but maybe the solution you've built tightly integrates into your application really well. You've provided the right experience. You are taking into consideration your application requirements versus the identity applications. But you get my point. At some point, the responsibility gets big, huge. Are you prepared to take that responsibility to scale out your solution? Fine, yeah.
Which is crazy, because I think in the head of a lot of developers or people that want to build such an application, it's just a username and password, right?
Correct.
But there is so much
more beyond that. Yeah, you're right. So that's why I say, do you have the skills? Do you really understand identity, right? It's not about the username and password. It's much more beyond that. And probably we need to discuss that in a different session. What it means, what happens after you.
Oh, please do. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, please explain.
So typically, there's a flow. Now, normally, what happens is your traditional systems are, hey, here's a user and here's a password, and let's see if these credentials match what we have stored in the database. Now, they haven't even considered thinking about breached credentials. So, how do you have the access and the vast knowledge around credentials that have been stolen, that have breached. So when you look at technologies or vendors who are experts, and all they do day and night is focus on the access, identity and access management into any application, they create provisions for making sure that if a username and password is breached, they know about it, so they prevent access to that application. But also they look at things like, hey, this user 5 minutes ago logged in from Egypt, and now they're logging in from South Africa. You can't travel, within 5 minutes from one location to another location. So these are all clever technologies that experts put into solutions that you go and buy because they have the investment, they have the time, they have the skills and the focus, to put that additional functionality in. So it's not just about entering a username and password and checking those credentials against the database. And then there's a whole kind of vast kind of area around, once you do have access, once you've gone through the front door, what can you do? Which other rooms can you access, right? And how far down the corridor you can travel. So there are all sorts of other considerations that have to come into mind. But let's go back to build versus buy. If you get to that, we got to a point where we talked about, I think one of the main challenges would be, how do you scale? How do you create resiliency? How do you maintain and manage the system? That's one element. But the other element is, as we talked in the last podcast, security is always evolving. The threats are always evolving. How do you stay ahead? How do you keep your system enhanced? Not only maintain, but how do you enhance it? So again, these are important considerations that you have to make when it comes to building your own solution. Now, I'll tell you what's happened a few times. What I've seen is organizations go out and do build a solution, and then years later they get breached, and their names are all over the press. Now, it's embarrassing.
It is.
But you don't want to get to that situation either. Now, I'm not scaremongering, but I've seen this happen. And then they go out there very quickly and say, right, we need to go and consult the experts. But then look, there are other organizations that I've seen who've done very successful projects. They know that the scale is not going to be an issue because they're not going to have that many users. They know it's going to be a single application that they're going to use. So in those sort of instances, yes, the use case is very simple, it's very manageable, and you can go and build your own solution. But most organizations here are, I think are building digital services that they want to monetize. They want scale. They want everyone using those services. They want to monetize them. That's the business model. So that's where you have to consider, can you the solution that you need, can it scale? Can it provide you with all the functionality you need today, but also in the future? Because look, what we're seeing is very quick trends in the market. Is we're seeing that the user experience is very important. You don't want to have 8 clicks to register and then another 4 clicks. That makes it 12 clicks before you access a service. People want the Amazon experience, buy with 1 click. That's the experience everybody wants. So in order to make sure that you are providing the right level of experience to your consumers of your services, you have to make sure that sometimes there is enough investment and effort gone into some of these technologies, and that's where vendors come in. That's where the advantages in buy comes in. Now, when you look at technologies from a buy perspective, there are many technologies. There's so much.
I'm still looking for the disadvantages, by the way. I'm listening to you, and I think, and I agree, and that's difficult to ask questions because I agree. It's like you're solving a part of the security stuff right at the front door. And there are a lot of ways to protect an environment, but it makes so much sense to protect and make sure you focus on the core of the problem. And that's what you're addressing right now. But at the same time, there must be some disadvantages, right? Like vendor lock-in or the security system itself being a single point of failure, or Maybe building it yourself is more flexible.
Yes, so look, you're absolutely right. So when you're looking at vendors, obviously there are many considerations you have to take. A, there's so many vendors out there. Which one do you choose first?
Yeah.
Which one do you go for? Second one is, if you do choose a vendor, and as you rightly said, are you locked in with that vendor, right? And lock-in means, is that vendor not using a standards-based approach? So standards are very key, right? Whether you're even building your own system or whether you're buying another system, make sure that there is the technologies you're selecting are based on standards. The reason standards is important, so there's no lock-in, so you can move, between technologies. But something that comes up very often is, the scope of your maturity in this space. Are you now completely dependent on the vendor you've chosen? What if their rate of, I would say, innovation is not as fast as you were expecting?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So what do you do then? Right. So that's something that I think you have to do a lot of due diligence beforehand. Now, doing due diligence, maybe you don't have the expertise in-house. Maybe you're relying on external consultants to do this due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
So again, how good are these external consultants that are doing the due diligence for you? So that's again a big factor you have to think about it. But then again, all this is expensive, Mike. It gets expensive, and very quickly you're wondering whether would it have been cheaper for me to build the solution myself or ourselves?
I think that sums it up, right? There is this trend in IT that a lot of solutions get standardized. Still part of a stack of a vendor, but get standardized. And maybe a way to look at this is that 20 years ago, you built your own computer, right? You didn't buy an Apple or a Dell or an HP. There were a lot of people that bought their own computer. Even in the gaming industry, they're probably no longer buying modules and build their own computer. They got a standardized, tailor-made, focused product that's very good for gaming. And that's a trend we see in software development as well, whether it's in data integration like Boomi or the security space we're talking right now in identity management. People are more and more relying on specialty products because it's becoming so core to their business. And it's not a one-on-one. It's not that I have my front door for one application. No, most of the time it's a front door for a whole set of applications, and that makes it even more critical. I'm still very carefully looking at vendor lock-in. That's the reason why I mentioned it, and I think our listeners and people should be very aware. But there are standards like you shared, and I share a little secret. Auth0 complies to those standards, which always enables you to reach out to another vendor or build it yourself. And there's this quote from a colleague of mine. I prepared these episodes with my colleagues as well. Are there questions you want to be answered? And he told me, it's Geert, everybody is capable of building his first application. But are you able to run it in a scalable and maintainable and a secure fashion over the years to come? That's a totally different ballgame. And my advice would be, is focus on the core of your application. And that's probably something to do with your business. And that's probably the reason why you wanted to build the application in the first place. And leave security and a lot of other spaces in the stack to the specialists. Probably that would sum it up for me.
You're completely right. And, I can't disagree with that. The only thing I would add to you is, that we talked about it in the first podcast. the threat is ever evolving, is getting more complex. And a solution that identity solution that, like for example, from Auth0, what it does is it takes around all the abstraction from complexity. So what you see is something very simple, something that's very easy to work with and use, but all the complexity around identity is built into the platform. So whoever's using this sort of solution needs to only worry about the integration points and not about the identity and security points.
So focus on the core of your application and leave the heavy lifting of security to others.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jas. Wonderful episode. And looking forward to episode number 3, where we're gonna look at the future of security. Thank you for listening. See you next time.